Welcome back to data privacy. We're in first semester, segment 1. This is part 3 of the lecture series. So, today we're going to be talking about the fundamental right of privacy and data privacy, as you can see on the slide in front of you. Let's back up a little bit to discuss what we talked about last time we met. Specifically, those were the foundations of data privacy. And the reason why we're backing up a little bit chronologically, but what I really wanted to do, and I think the best way for you to process all this information, is have a foundation of what compartments it goes in. So as we progress through this, not only chronologically, but also in terms of subjects and diving in, I want you to be able to compartmentalize it, because it's very important for you to understand generally how all these working parts are related and work together. That's actually, in my opinion, what makes this subject so fun. There are some where it's frozen in history, and you just memorize it and it's not going to change. This subject, data privacy, rapidly evolves, and with my own personal practice, this is one of the areas that I really keep on top of and do a whole lot of work to stay ahead of the game, because through countries and even states, it rapidly changes in all different areas, which in my opinion makes it a lot of fun. So, but in order to somewhat anticipate the changes, especially for your smaller clients to best serve them, we really need to study the foundations. And that's why I talked to you last time we met about the fundamental things, basically, and the principles that started in the 70s. So we have what data is collected, limiting to what's collected and what shouldn't be collected, making sure it's accurate, letting the individual know and getting their consent before it's collected and what it's going to be used for. So we have what's collected, what it's used for, why it's used for, knowing the individual's okay with it. If things change, get the consent of the individual. There are a few exceptions that are relative and intuitive. We'll get to that later. Also, how it's stored. Once the data is collected, make sure it's secure, and to make sure that they're following these principles, we need generally some type of accountability. Now, a fundamental right. Let's back up a little bit from that. And while you're thinking of those things, let's go through these fundamental rights so you can put the two together. The reason why I have fundamental right question mark is because you'll see specifically the rights of the person keeping their information private versus the rights of what others see, not only security, but also maybe public speech or commercial speech. Let's start with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and this is from the United Nations. You can see this in one of your readings. It's a short reading, but it's still very accurate and holds. And I wanted you, again, we're dealing with foundations. So here's universally and internationally human rights. Of course, people are born free with dignity, right to the security of a person. Of course, no torture or treating another person cruel. And there we have freedom. These are very fundamental bullet points. But what we want to look at is, and we can go through, look at Article 12. So no person shall be subjected to interference with his or her privacy. Okay? This is in 48. So, but fast forwarding, we're making sure that everybody international has a right, or at least what the UN thought at the time, and I subscribe to, people have the right to their privacy. Article 17, not only privacy, but then we go the right to own property, as well as in association with others, and arbitrarily deprived of property. The reason why I wanted to look at fundamental rights, and that's intuitive, right? The right to control your property, to keep it secure, to have security of person, to have freedom, to choose who has your property or not, is people have different opinions. and somebody's right to freedom of what they want to do, they have the freedom to do this or do that, or not to do this or do that, naturally sometimes collides with what another person's opinion of what they have the right to do or not to do. That's why in the second bullet point I put up, by whose definitions? What happens when there's a conflict? Think of 9/11. We'll get to that in a second. Having said that, let's back up a little bit and look specifically to our fundamental rights in the United States. Again, the Bill of Rights, mainly the 14th Amendment, the due process when one's liberty, and that's privacy, but specifically, you know the phrase, life, liberty, or property, is threatened. And from that flows, again, the right to be left alone. And of course, Article 4, unreasonable searches and seizures. Now that we've gone through the UN's 1948 Declaration of Human Rights, let's back up a little bit and couch it into our own Constitution. Again, the Bill of Rights, specifically the 14th and the 4th Amendment. The 14th Amendment, of course, is due process, when one's life, liberty, or property is threatened or at stake. We focus on one's liberty, and thus we get the right of privacy through the 14th Amendment. Of course, the 4th Amendment, the right against unreasonable searches and seizures. Again, clearly we're talking about searching and seizure of data, and thus privacy as well. So having said that, I do very well with specifics, and you'll learn this about me. Let's go through and talk about some of these rights. Clearly, after September 11th and the atrocities, if somebody wants their data private, they may have a reason to do so, but when can the government step in and secure it? And this is a great decision. How much can the government listen in and secure it? And we're going to get to this with Snowden and everything else that happened after 9/11 versus the privacy. So, and that's why I bring up fundamental rights of the UN, because everybody has the right to not be tortured, to be secure in their person, to have freedom, but that sometimes means that we need to gather data for whatever reason, and we have to weigh these balances. When is it okay to gather data, potentially without somebody's consent? How do you gather it? How do you limit it? Versus the right to privacy and have their data controlled, or maybe gather data that you don't need. A huge topic and a huge debate. How about another instance? And these are talking points that we're going to talk about after class, or during class, but after the lecture period. The right to be left alone versus the safety of others. That's clear, isn't it? Right into what we had to with terrorists versus privacy. But this may be more of, I don't know, a clear example would be a health practitioner doing a psychological evaluation with a doctor-patient privilege. However, when the patient is at risk of going out and harming others, when is their information kept private versus given to the police? Facebook and Google. People put all kinds of information in social media and on the internet. When they start gathering that, and this will trickle through to the next 2 points, how do you limit Facebook? How much do they gather? And what can they use it for? The people who put information on social media, Facebook is great in point, not just security and data breaches, but also pulling all that information, what they use it for and what they are allowed to use it for and what they may gather and not use it for. Same with Google, of pulling in information. We're going to look at identifiers next time we meet, and you'll really see why this is relevant. And I think it will surprise you as to how an individual can be identified with seemingly very little information. And that's why this is so important with Google, Facebook, social media, and the internet. University admissions, of course. There's all kinds of information and that is given to the universities, but also what we look at is what they can and can't use for university admissions. I'm sure we've all heard tons of stories of people that have not gotten into the university of choice, including places like Harvard, for things and data that's been gathered and used, whether they consented or not, whether it was private or not. Clearly it wasn't private if the university gathered it. And then again, indirect identifiers. We'll get to this next week, but one or two pieces of information, just as a teaser, may not identify a person directly, but you would be surprised what the gender, the zip code, and maybe one other piece of information can lead to in identifying persons. That's it for this session. We'll see you next time. Again, Lee Ludeman. Oh my gosh, that last part was so dumb, Nick. Sorry. I'm calling you now.